Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger with our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp LaRouche, the founder and chairman of the Schiller Institute. It's April 28th, 2021. And Helga, it's obvious now that we're moving into a very serious danger of war breaking out. There are a number of hotspots, a number of fronts. There's a huge amount of pressure coming from, especially Washington, London, Brussels, targeting Russia and China, but also Iran, Syria, Yemen. I think the place to start is that President Putin warned on April 21st of crossing red lines. And it appears as though the Western governments seem intent on challenging that. What do you make of this?
Well, I think that it is actually horrifying how few people are aware of the acute danger in which the existence of civilization finds itself. There are a few voices who are warning of nuclear war. One of them, Tulsi Gabbard, who about 2 weeks ago in a show with Tucker Carlson pointed to the fact that if there would be an outbreak of war, it would turn nuclear and it would reach the territory of the United States. And, you would have basically people burning and nobody would remain alive. And, she used quite drastic pictures. A similar warning comes from an analyst with military background, Lyle Goldstein, who said that a nuclear war with China could end life on Earth. And there's also an investigative journalist with the name of Kathleen Johnston, who already wrote several articles in a row saying, that the danger of nuclear war is completely underestimated. And I can only say, when you study the whole strategic picture, how these different scenarios are unfolding, it is high time to wake up. Now, the confrontation with Russia is clearly going in the direction of regime change against Putin, against in China against Xi Jinping, but it also, affects practically every force which seems to be not sworn into the NATO rules-based order. The idea of going back to an unipolar world, and any government which stands in the way gets wiped out through color revolution or through some other means. And that is the path to World War III, because, as you say, Putin has made it very clear that there are red lines the West is better not crossing. And if that is happening, then the response would be asymmetric, swift, and stern. And he also said in that same speech that in the case of Belarus and the attempt to make a coup attempt and an assassination attempt against President Lukashenko has already crossed that line, that has gone too far. Now, on that last point, it is quite amazing. There are reports by the FSB, that's the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia, but also the KGB of Belarus, that they have evidence and they have the personnel involved of people who were preparing a military coup against Belarus on the 9th of May, the upcoming victory parade, and that there was a plan to assassinate Lukashenko. Now, they have the people who were charged with that, and that is quite incredible. We talked about this in the past, that even the German foreign minister, Heiko Maas, said that they spent quite an amount of millions to support the opposition. Now, I have no idea if the German government was participating in that, but what the Russian and Belarusian sources mention is the name of another person called Michael Carpenter as being a key figure in this plot. Now, Michael Carpenter is close to Biden. He worked in some advisory capacity during the Obama administration for Biden. He is very close to the Nazis in Ukraine, because when Parubi came to Washington in 2018, it was Michael Carpenter who 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 basically brought him around. And when he was asked, why don't you know the extreme right-wing Nazi profile of this person, he said, oh no, he's a great patriot. So he is now working with the Atlantic Council, the Penn Biden Center, and that has to be investigated, because if you have something in, I'm not saying that this is a totally research story, but if you have practically the president of the second nuclear power in the possession of more than 6,000 nuclear weapons, basically accusing the other president of the other nuclear power has almost as much nuclear missiles. I mean, this is serious stuff. This is the kind of stuff which happens before world wars. And, naturally, if you look at the Western media, I mean, it is unbelievable. If you listen, for example, to Deutschlandfunk, they had a program about this, I think this morning. And the journalist said, oh, this is just Belarus propaganda. Lukashenko just wants to change the constitution to stay in office forever. So they dismiss this completely. And I think this is really a very, very scary Gleichhaltung. This was the word used in the Nazi regime when all the media said the same thing. And you have that kind of, clear, visible influence of what the Integrity Initiative, a sidekick of British intelligence, used to call cluster agents. So you have a streamlining where something happens which borders already, a coup is discovered, and then immediately the coverage goes in the direction of, dismissing it all. Anyway, I just think this is really scary, and people have become so indifferent, that almost nothing seems to wake them up anymore. But I think we are sitting on a complete powder keg.
That was one of the points Putin made, that everyone seems to accept that this is legitimate behavior, these kinds of sanctions, these kinds of coups and assassinations. Also, Carpenter was very close to Biden. He was an aide to Biden during the point at which Biden was involved in the Ukraine coup in February 2014. And this was one of the other cases that was mentioned by Putin as part of the red lines. Now, then there was this absolutely bizarre story coming out of the Czech Republic blaming Russia for an explosion that took place in 2014. What's this about, Helga?
Well, this is a very nefarious story. There was this incident, an ammunition depot exploded, and basically it was said that it would have been done by the same two Russians who were accused in the Skripal affair. Basically, that the identity of these Russians was very dubious all the time. So now President Zeman from the Czech Republic denounced that and said that they have Czech security forces who basically say there is absolutely no evidence for the identity of these two Russians. And then the Speaker of the Parliament started to say that Zeman must be eliminated on the basis of high treason, eliminated from his position as president. And there is apparently already a signature gathering for the same effect. Now, Maria Zakharova, who is the speaker of the spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry of Russia, she basically completely denounced that. And it is extremly ominous. I mean, Maria Zakharova basically said that there must be an investigation. What were these mines? Why was it that you had an ammunition depot in the Czech Republic, which was not under the control of a Czech person, but some Bulgarian weapon traders? And if there were anti-personnel mines in this depot, which are illegal. So she raises a whole other series of questions. Now, I mean, this is unbelievable, that a president who basically intervenes in a situation which could be very, very quickly out of control and says there is no basis for such a Russian involvement, and then they try to get rid of him for treason. I mean, that's just one other piece, and that then this whole affair then led to the expulsion of 60 Russian diplomats. So, I mean, if you look at this whole situation, Poland, Ukraine, Czech Republic, Belarus, these are all republics, or countries, basically belonging to the former Soviet Union, but being practically at the border of Russia. And, therefore, obviously, this is an immediate security threat. And, if there would have been a military coup in Belarus, you could have NATO troops at the border of Russia. And, that is the kind of red lines Putin is talking about, because these things are completely unacceptable because they no longer allow to protect the security of the country. So that is one of the things why I think people really have to wake up, that this permanent war of words, sanctions, is really the stuff of world wars. And I think people should also wake up to the fact that the Chinese, when asked what is the Chinese view on these sanctions against Russia and all these other activities, the spokesman of the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that China will come to the help of Russia because China is against the idea of unilateral sanctions. And, we have also seen an increasing rapprochement between Russia and China, which, among other things, was expressed by a meeting between Wang Yi and Lavrov in beginning of February in Guilin in China, where they were talking about the increase of the partnership between those two countries, which has a military implication. So we are really looking at something, which could, if it gets out of control, be really the end of the world. And we should not forget that it was the head of the US STRATCOM, Strategic Command, Admiral Charles Richard, who had said in February that he had advised the Pentagon that the likelihood of a nuclear war is no longer not likely, but very likely. And that same STRATCOM had a tweet last week in which they said that, the possibility that any one of these conflicts could go quickly into an escalation where the adversary thinks that the recourse to nuclear weapons is the only option left. So that is out there, and some people read it and take it in and think about it, and others are completely indifferent. And I think we have to wake people up that we are on a very dangerous trajectory, which urgently has to be changed.
And as so often is the case, much of the inflammatory rhetoric and the stories coming out, the fake stories and so on, are coming from British intelligence channels, including on consecutive days this last week, Chatham House had a report calling for Europe to do more or else risk that Russia will invade. And then the Economist, the mouthpiece for the City of London, said we have to raise the cost of any potential Russian aggression. Now, at the same time, these are the people who are pushing the Great Reset and the Green New Deal coming from the City of London. I'd like your thoughts on what's going on in Germany with this incredible public relations campaign around the new Green candidate, Baerbock, who is in the virtually every day a puff piece in the major German press.
Yeah, I think, apart from the fact I had the mispleasure to listen to her in a short interview with Anne Will on Sunday, and she came across as a complete chatterbox. In German word would be Schnattergans. She talks a lot, but the substance is very little. But the directionality of what she does is really dangerous. I think the idea that she's now in the polls rising and the Greens, because she's a young, fresh face and so forth. If that is a short-term effect, people should not forget Martin Schulz, who also was skyrocketing in the polls and then collapsed completely. And I think, the best which could happen to the world and Germany is that that would happen to Baerbock as well. But, maybe people are just sick and tired of the non-response of the EU, the government in the pandemic, and they indeed want to have a change, sort of like an AfD effect. But people should look at the substance. And there was an interesting review today in RT Germany. I only glanced over it, and I was reminded that one should read the program of the Greens, because if you remember, a certain book was not read in the 20s and the 30s, and the consequences were horrendous. So what this article describes in reviewing the actual election program of the Greens, there's nothing new, but if you take it all together, it is quite something. First of all, she is completely aggressive, and the Greens in general, against Russia, against China, for NATO, for Biden, for an integration and expansion of the EU, for the idea of making the European monetary system practically a European monetary fund, and making the euro a leading currency like the dollar, so that it would basically be possible to blackmail people with the currency. And it goes on and on like that. It's completely correct to say that they are completely not tolerant for any. They claim to be so diverse and so multi, whatnot. But if you look at their arrogance towards the developing countries or towards any other culture, such as Russia and China, for example, it is. And the article makes a very interesting reference, saying that what comes across is the bad smell of the dark past of Germany. And I think there is an absolute element of that there. And, I can only say that, people should study what it means. And if you would have now a German government, which would be black, green, black, whatever, on a confrontation course with Russia and China, World War III is almost guaranteed, because then, the dynamic of confrontation, which we just discussed before, would be accelerated, and there would be absolutely nothing to block it. So I can only say, this would be the absolute disaster for civilization, and people should really think it through, what it means in terms of implementing policies which mean, the Great Reset, that's the environment in which such a candidacy is being pushed, already means that if it gets implemented, it would mean no development for the developing countries. It would mean increasing the gap between the rich countries and the poor, widening it in such a way that, mass genocide would be the consequence. So I think, in this context, we don't need another am deutschen Wesen muss die Welt genesen, because that's the implication of what these Queens are saying.
Well, and Helga, for a long time, you have been fighting to get people to recognize that what the so-called Green Revolution is really about is population reduction at an increasing level. And that's totally coherent with the Green New Deal, isn't it?
Yes, because, if you give all the power to the big banks and the, large multinational corporations, big insurance companies, central banks, this is the synarchy. This is a notion which is not very much discussed nowadays anymore, but some years ago, we did a study on the role of the synarchy in the 20s and 30s by basically, bringing about fascist governments. And this was the French, in France, there are a lot of books written about the synarchy, unlike in Germany. I have no idea why that is, but if you want to study research synarchy, you better do it in France. where they describe in great detail that the Synarchists gave themselves a charter in the 30s, beginning of the 30s, where they say that it is the self-interest of the financial sector to make sure that no politician will ever have a position of power who is not in the interest of the banks. And what must be prevented by all means are politicians to come into power positions who are defending the common good, especially in times of crisis. Now, if you look at this present configuration, Baerbock says, oh, it doesn't matter that she has no experience in government. There are all these young new leaders, New Zealand, I don't know what other countries she mentioned. But that is also an effort. This is like the old method of the Jesuits in the 17th century, where they, they pick what they think are talented young people who are, willing to go along, to get along. They're being groomed then as young leadership crops, and just to make sure that nobody ever comes in a position who is not a proponent of the neoliberal dogma. And I think that that is exactly what we are seeing right now with Baerbock. So I think that this is an old Synarchist trick. And just to mention it, in the Welt am Sonntag, this is a leading German daily, their Sunday edition, they had last Sunday a very interesting article where they describe in great detail how the large foundations are being financed to put green analysis out. And, in part, the German government is involved. And it's all the greedy organizations, Mercator, Climate Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Angora Energiewende, Bund, NABU. These are all known entities, and they get millions of dollars or euros in that case. And these are the people who make the so-called public opinion, and they are identical with this financial interest, who would be the only ones who profit from a large investment of, they're talking about $60 trillion in the next 10 years into green technology at the expense of anything having to do with fossil fuels or nuclear energy. And you cannot go to such low energy flux densities without driving down the population level, which can be maintained. And it would mean for sure absolutely no development for the developing sector. And there are now more and more voices who are recognizing that, like, for example, the Indian energy minister, Singh, just said, that there are in Africa 800 million Africans who have no electricity, who urgently need that. And that would be denied if you go for this great reset. And other voices, the Global Times had a very harsh editorial saying that if you go for this, it means to make the gap between the rich and the poor permanent and even widen it. And so hopefully, more and more people are waking up. Now, this article I mentioned in Welt am Sonntag should be read, but if people want to have an in-depth analysis of that, we published a study, the Great Reset, where we show exactly, how these operations have been set up, how the Davos World Economic Forum, sponsored a whole other push for all of this. And, this is really a fascist takeover of the financial oligarchy. And what they would do is to implement on a global scale Schachtian economics with the same result as it happened with Hjalmar Schacht in the first place. So I think people really have to wake up. These are not normal times, and the danger is enormous.
Well, Helga, we'll be playing a role in waking people up by bringing together some of those opposition voices at a conference on May 8th, which will take up, among other things, the war danger that you've just been talking about, the danger of depopulation, but also the update on what's happening with the coronavirus, which so many people are allowing their sensitivity to the danger from these things to be covered up by the fact that people don't trust governments. What can you tell us about the May 8th conference?
Well, I mean, it will have basically two panels. One will be on the strategic situation, where we already have lined up extremely top level speakers from many countries from across the Atlantic, but also Asia. Um, and then the second panel will be on the work of the Committee of Coincidence of Opposites. This is, our effort to put really together a machine, an anti-Malthusian machine of people who are fighting to get a modern health system in every single country on the planet, which we have been saying from the beginning. Many people may remember that there was almost no program where we did not mention the need to go for a modern health system in every single country. Now, many people in the United States and in Europe, have completely pushed this aside. They're, even saying no masks and the pandemic is an invention and plot by Rockefeller and Bill Gates, all this talk. But, again, look at this as a world phenomena. There is now in India a new strain of the virus, which popped up very quickly. In February, India had infection rates of about 10,000 a day. And now there are for 1 week above 360,000 every single day. The death rate is going up. And there is a suspicion that even the rate of the present known infected people, that this may only be 5% of what's really going on. And it's spreading from the cities now to the rural areas. And the health system is completely, over demanded, so that the Italian ambassador to India today issued an alarm call for the whole world, saying India needs urgently assistance from the whole world because the situation is so out of control. Now that comes on top of an out of control situation in Brazil. And, what we said from the beginning, a pandemic can only be defeated if you defeat it in every country, because otherwise these strains develop and then they hit back. And the danger is that they, at a certain point, may even make inefficient the vaccines which already have been administered. So, what we will therefore discuss, among other things, is what to do to stop the pandemic by creating a world health system, to stop the world famine, which is big, especially in countries like Syria, Yemen, but also Haiti. There are many other countries, but these countries which are hit by sanctions. So we demand that all sanctions be lifted. Sanctions are a brutal form of warfare against the poorest, the children, the old people, those people who can't really help themselves. So, this is a call for action, to really change the whole situation around and, get more people to understand that we need to change the policy because, this is really, we are heading towards a disaster. And that's what people have to get and then have to move and move fast with us.
Well, our viewers can go to the schillerinstitute.com website and register for the conference. There's a lot of supplemental material there. And as you mentioned, the pamphlet, The Great Leap Backwards, gives a full historical and philosophical expose of the forces behind genocide and population reduction over the last couple hundred years, but especially since the 1960s. So, Helga, anything else you want to emphasize?
Yes, to end with a more positive note, I would urge all of you to watch a beautiful concert which the Schiller Institute New York chorus just made last Sunday. It was beautiful spirituals, unbelievably beautiful, beautiful songs, and the credo of the Missa Solemnis by Beethoven and Ave Verum. But this was all done under conditions of the pandemic. So this was people rehearsing in separate locations, but then working as a chorus, working as a real concert together. And it's done so beautiful. And it gives you an idea why, we have to really have a renaissance of classical music, because, mankind is meant to be beautiful and creative and courageous. And we have to liberate people from their present oppression, which takes many forms. And the best way to do that is through classical music. So please watch this concert and spread it around, because it is a taste of what future we need to create.
Well, thank you, Helga, for joining us this week. And again, sign up for the May 8th conference on the Schiller Institute site and become a member of the Schiller Institute. So, Helga, until next week, we'll see you.
Till next week.